I was told that this is a flowering pear tree, and it grows in the backyard and was blossoming this past week, and so I went out and took some photographs. And that was the beginning of the idea to do this painting. Hi, my name is Kris. My channel is Painting the Pieces, and I'm starting with a flower from that flowering pear tree that you saw in the photograph. Now that it's spring, I'm going to get out to my garden and take pictures of different shrubs and flowers that happen to be blossoming and doing some paintings of those. This is sometimes the way that I start a more abstracted piece. This is a relatively small format, large enough that I can sort of investigate different things and do some more details. This is the Lightwish watercolors, the 48 pan set that I've used in the past. And I'm just using a cadmium red and with a lot of water, and that's why it's appearing to be pink. So what happens generally is that I do a painting like this, and I have a larger canvas. I think that it's 26 by 40 on the easel. And once I get this painting finished, then I'm going to do an abstract on that canvas of this idea. So I'm not sure why this works well for me, but it does. That if I draw a pretty realistic painting, then I can abstract it more easily. Maybe because I know the structure and the bits and pieces, and it allows me to think more of how I can alter that. I have done abstracts in the beginning without this piece of the puzzle done, and it's usually fine, but I just feel a little bit more comfortable, I guess, having gotten to know how I'm going to shade and certainly what palette I'm going to use. That's very helpful. So we'll see how that turns out, and I will film that as well for the people who like to see the more abstracted paintings. Now in the flowers that are more in the bottom of the painting, I wanted to have the darker colors. But I will go back in later and make all of the shadows just a little bit darker. Now I'm keeping it pretty light with quite a bit of water. And as you saw in the original painting, it was mostly blues and grays, very muted. There wasn't any pink. But I wanted to explore different kinds of colors in this painting, so each flower that I do may maintain the shape, but I'm going to use a different color, which you'll see as we go along. And this is that heavy watercolor rag that I've been using for the last few paintings that have been on paper. And I really like it. I would buy this pack again. I had done a painting a little bit smaller than this one on a canvas paper, and I didn't tape it down because I just was doing a quick painting, and it really buckled and did not straighten out. Now this paper generally doesn't buckle. Now it did a tiny bit with this, but by the next morning it had flattened right out. It's just so dense a paper, and I really like that, and I like the decal edges, as you can see there. So I'm pretty happy with the way this pink one is going. I've gone back in here with a watercolor white, which is just sort of an opaque color, but it does lighten things up a little bit. It gives it just a little more of maybe an eggshell kind of color. You can see it a little bit from the camera's perspective here, but in person it's a nice, more of a almost gouache kind of feel to it. So this is that flower that's dried a little bit. And I've sketched in, as you can see, some leaves and another flower. So this one I'm going to do in the blues, more like the color actually in the photograph is more this color. And if I was doing just a painting based on the photograph, I would have done it all in this color. I wouldn't have added any pinks, but I'm playing with the pink because of the painting that's coming. And this is an ultramarine blue shade with quite a bit of water. This and the red that I used before are pretty intense colors if I use them with very little water. You'll see when I go back in to work on the shadows of that red one and also of this blue flower that I'll be using more intensity with less water. And so this is really a nice blue-gray if you put enough water in with it. And where the petals overlap too, that underneath will be shaded. So I'll get a nice darker gray and blue there, just as I'm doing now. Just to sort of show the viewer that one is on top of the other. This for me is just a very relaxing practice too. I did want to mention that. And maybe that's the thing about doing a painting after it, that's the abstracted painting, or even if I was going to do a large version of this, I have it all laid out and it in a smaller version that I can really play with. And it's just makes the larger canvas too that much more relaxing. And that's the reason I paint. It's a very calming kind of practice for me, and it always has been. Maybe with the exceptions of a commission, which I've talked about, but I don't do many commissions anymore, so. And the watercolor just lends itself so well to that blending, as you can see, getting a certain part of the petal a little bit more shaded than the others. And just kind of separating those from each other as best you can. And we don't have to be too exacting with any of these things because the eye knows what a flower looks like, and it reads this is a flower, and it knows these are petals and those kinds of things. I just moved the water there, lifting the paper a bit. There's a lot of water on the end of that petal. I thought originally that this was a flowering cherry, but a neighbor of mine said, no, it's a flowering pear. I'm not very good with plant identification, or this is a new garden for me. What is coming up in it is sometimes a surprise. And this is just there's I think 4 shades of green. On this order, there's kind of a bright green, yellow green, and this is more one of the muted shades. The olive, as I've used in other pieces, is more of a brown green, and you'll see that later because I'm bringing that in to really make the dark pieces dark. I didn't use any black in this painting, which is unusual for me. I like black, but I was able to achieve the dark colors that I wanted to just by using browns and that olive green. So this is still that same green. You can see, depending on the water, you get a lot of nice greens. And these are all pretty pastel right now. And that's never a goal for me, particularly. It's just that I like to get them down and know where they're going to be before I add a lot of color. Once I have a sense of the shape that I like and the color, then I will go back in, like with this leaf here. So I've done the bottom of that a little more darkly. Right now the paper, as far as the orientation, where my hand is the bottom of the painting. So I have the paper tilted a little bit. So if it looks a little bit odd that the dark colors are at the side, they're really at the bottom of the painting as it would be displayed. It's one of the fun things too about abstracting flowers, is that I can get it made and I'm thinking of it a certain way, a certain orientation, and then I flip it to paint a different section of it, and then I find out that I like it better in that orientation than I did with the one I started in. Doesn't really matter, it's what you like at the end. And sometimes you're not able to see that until you turn the painting, so that's another plus of turning it around. There's a little center piece. Now this is the olive green that I put down, but with a lot of water, so it's not showing its intensity very much in this leaf. But you can see it does give you that sort of yellow and brown color that is so nice. But as I was starting to say, the center of each of these flowers, if you're not familiar with a flowering pear, which I wasn't, has little stems that come up, and there's little orange bits on the end. I'm sure there are much more scientific terms for those structures that I'm describing, but I think you know what I'm talking about. It would be nice if I came prepared with what terminology is used, but I don't think we can hope for that. Just want to get these leaves in next to the flowers. At the end of this video, I show the finished piece so that you'll be able to see the orientation of that. And you can look at the first, which is the photo that I used, as I mentioned, and then the end, and see sort of how I extrapolated an idea. It's not exactly the photo, but you can certainly see what I drew from the inspiration of that photograph. And that is another brown, darker brown, almost umber. Now I've moved the camera out a little bit so I can get to this orange piece. So my idea was always to do a pink flower, a blue flower, and a more yellow-based flower. So this is the one that I'm working on. Getting that last piece in. And sometimes there's little folds in the petal, so I'm putting those in as best I can as well, and little dark bits that you can see through to the other side. This is that olive green with not so much water as it had been before, and just a little bit of the branch peeking through that blue flower came from. I was using the olive green to bring in that idea that there is a branch behind these flower buds, these blooming pieces. There was just a little bit peeking through that was a different color, so I decided to use the red because I wanted to have the reddish blue at another side of the painting. And we've talked about that if you're going to do a color, it's nice to have it throughout the painting, not just on one side. Especially when it's up next to the gold flower. This is more of that olive green. You can see how much brown it has in it when it's compared to the other greens and the different colors that are in this. And this is more of the tree shape behind the flower that leads to that branch. You can see, even with what I'm doing here that I consider fairly representational, there's still an element of abstraction to it with the branch and the tree shape. This is more of that olive green. And I haven't mixed anything with the olive green at this point, so that's how brown it is. I'm just mixing water, no other paints with it. And I'm getting those different shades. It really is beautiful. Now I had another little flower coming up in the garden, and it's in a different place than this one is, but I just wanted to get the little shape of that in. And that's because of that abstract painting that I'm talking about. That will have lots of different kinds of smaller flowers layered on top. Things that wouldn't necessarily be next to the original flowers because this is up in a tree, these pieces. So now I'm going back in and getting those shadows pretty red. Now that the pink layer, the layer with lots of water, has dried, you can go back in and really get some intensity with those petals. And you really need that to get the kind of depth that you're going to want to have. You could see the pastel flowers look nice, but they're not, without the depth, you just don't get the feeling of what that flower is and how the colors need to blend with that and show the different folds and things, which is what I'm exploring at this point, trying to get the nature of. And then going back and getting more intensity into those little flowers at the side. And it is a fun way to think about any kind of abstraction, is to pull different pieces that might not be together in some way and still put them in the painting, because if the shapes are right and you have the palette set, it's going to work in that piece. So don't be afraid, especially if you're doing a study or something like I'm doing here, a smaller piece. This is the time to really play with the shapes. Another angle, because I'm going to paint the yellow flower that's below. And this is more of a sort of lemon color. Right now I didn't have very much water with that, so that's a pretty intense gold, where the paint is fairly light yellow, like the skin of a lemon. Just getting those shapes in. I'm glad in this particular video, it seems like the graphite is much more apparent than it has been in the other ones, and I wanted you to be able to see the structure. You can certainly, with something like this, and especially if it's an abstract piece, I would recommend it, not drawing things in, just painting them in. And you'll see that with the larger piece, because it really does give you more flexibility. Because in an abstract, you're not going to care that much about what the petal shape is. Just, as long as you're getting the sort of idea there, if you want to, that it's a flower shape. And you may not even want that. You may want to abstract it even more than that, so that the flower shape is not even necessary. It was just something that gave you the idea of how to start a painting. And sometimes that's all you need, and then you can just take off from there. Now, I have the sort of lemon yellow in the center of these flowers, but on the edge I'm using the color that's right next to the lemon yellow, and it has a lot of orange in it. And if you get a pool of paint, as you see me do in certain petals or in certain sections, I just go back in and mop up that water and paint that's with it, and I take it to another section and start to paint with it. And that way you've sort of solved two situations. You're getting paint in a place where there wasn't any. Now this was a green that was kind of a bright green, and I went back and added one of the browns to it. And some of it's off the camera, I'm sorry about that, but you can see as I go on that adding that brown to the green really settles that green down and gives you a nice shade. So you'll be able to see this too more in the finished piece. I'm sorry that it's off the camera. and a little more modeling where the leaf texture comes in. These all seem to have a little bit of a green center with those green stems coming out and then the orange pieces at the end. Just attempting to get a little more texture on those leaves. So next week, if my plan holds, I will start, I'm not sure if I'll finish, but I will start the large abstracted piece that I'm talking about that will come from this one. So it will be good to have watched this one because you'll know where the ideas came from and you know how I thought about the palette. That will all be outlined and sort of settled with this piece. And then I can just more freely work on the large with some of the ideas or some of the problems already solved. I like to, in the summer, if I can, get the large paintings pretty much finished in abstract, the abstracted pieces, and then do those in acrylic. And then after the acrylic has dried and I'm pretty satisfied with where things are, go over it with light glazings of oil, because oil adds that depth to the painting that I like, and then you just leave it dry. I leave it dry for probably a week. One of the nice things about oil, you know, and the way it works, but one of the downsides is the drying time. But if it's your last glazing piece, then that works out fine. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this painting and listening to me talk about why I'm doing things the way I am. And I hope to see you next week. If you like this and want to make sure that you are alerted, just click the like and subscribe, and you'll get the notification next week. I try to release the big videos on Sunday and the shorts on Wednesdays. So thanks so much for watching.